India. Today we're going to start our introduction to cultural learning. If you're already abroad, what have you noticed so far? What surprises you? Is it more or less different than you expected? Today we're going to talk about culture and how to make sense of those differences using cultural frameworks and theories. So first, what exactly is culture? Many students say they want to study abroad because they want to learn about another culture, but they often don't realize just how complex the idea of culture is and how difficult it is to actually learn about another culture. This is because culture really refers to a couple of different things. First, it's often used to refer to a place and a people, particularly one that's different than yours. This kind of exotic and almost mythological sense is what a lot of people are thinking of when they say that they want to travel abroad. They might be thinking of different architecture, art, music, dance, language, dress, food. In other words, the sort of living embodiment of differences of another group of people. We sometimes refer to this as big C culture, to represent it as a sort of named objective thing. Big C culture elements are the tangible, visible products, the things that the people within the culture make and use, the artifacts. But there's also a meaning of culture, which has to do with the way that people are socialized to think and act and behave. We sometimes refer to this as little c culture, to represent culture as a more subconscious experience that sits below the level of awareness. Little c culture is the set of values, beliefs, and mindsets that are generally agreed upon and lived by, the social norms that guide interactions, the social and political structures, and the basic components of everyday life. And when you think about what it means to live your everyday life, well, there's a lot to it. It takes a lot of effort to uncover the degree and the depth of things that have been taught to you, which means there's a huge degree and depth to learning about another culture as well. And because our own culture is so ingrained in us, we don't realize our thoughts, our norms, our values, our way of interacting in the world, our behaviors, our attitudes have all been taught to us and are constantly reinforced to us by the people around us. We think it's simply human nature, that it's universal. But in reality, nearly every aspect of our way of life have all been taught to us. So one of the first steps in cultural learning is recognizing that we have a culture ourselves that's been taught to us, that's been reinforced to us. And then validating that other people have been taught, been socialized into their culture. Acknowledging that these are just different value systems, different ways of living life, not right or wrong ways. But it takes more than just recognizing that there are different ways to be a truly intercultural person. We not only have to learn about the cultural differences, we have to open our mind and our heart to appreciate and not judge those differences, and then adapt our behaviors in order to effectively interact with the right skills. So what are some of these differences that we need to look for and be open to adapting to? One way to conceptualize culture is to think of it as an iceberg. There are the surface level, visible components, big C culture, which are what we often latch onto as the quote-unquote differences. Art, architecture, food, language, celebrations, rituals, etc. But below the surface is what we call deep culture, invisible culture, little c culture, the deep-seated, subconscious norms, values, and expectations that drive everyday behavior. This can include communication styles and norms, notions of courtesy and friendship, cleanliness and beauty, concepts of time, fairness, and cooperation, roles related to age, sex, class, or gender, attitudes towards elders, dependents, authorities, rules, relationships with nature and animals and human conditions, and approaches to religion, marriage, family, problem solving. These deep-level components tend to be more influential to people, but are often harder to uncover, harder to define. There's another really important difference between visible and invisible cultural elements: how and when they change. Visible cultural elements can change in a short span of time, as short as a decade. Clothing styles change, new vocabulary is added to language, food choices and mealtime habits shift, etc. Invisible cultural elements are much slower to change, and yet, these are the components that people feel most anxious about potentially changing. They may blame it on the younger generation, or immigrants, or any other subculture that doesn't seem to share their deep beliefs. In fact, you can see there's a sort of meta-awareness that culture exists and is something that is taught when you hear comments like, "This generation just isn't being raised right." People worry about this because this part that sits below the surface is the foundation that the other components of daily life are built upon. If that foundation is threatened, it leads to a sense of uncertainty about what to expect from others, both individually and collectively. Our foundational values explain, and thus help us know how to navigate everything from systems of justice, paths to success, ways of displaying one's identity, our sense of purpose, and our roles, and on and on. So sometimes people become even more rigid about rejecting change, not just to maintain their cultural values, but to display cohesion, unity, commitment, and even power.
Have a positive benefit because we're showing discipline and we're showing consequences and we're preserving our structure and our way of life. And so changing that mindset is really challenging.
Because you've been raised and immersed in your own culture for so long, you've come to believe that the way that you think and act is normal, and you may be quick to judge or give negative labels to others who think and act in different ways. You also probably don't realize that you are being judged in negative ways when you continue to behave in the way you are used to in your home culture and not in the ways of your host culture. You may not recognize or realize that there are differences, or you may think that people are being purposely rude to you, which then might lead you to withdraw and not interact with people anymore. All of this fuels a cycle that makes it harder and harder to immerse yourself in and to learn from your host culture. So how do you move away from judgment and into cultural awareness and intercultural competence? There are three components that I want to talk about: a knowledge component, an attitude component, and a behavioral component. The knowledge component, of course, means gaining new knowledge, new information about your place. This can include learning about the history, politics, environment, religion, rites and rituals and celebrations of the place. The attitude, or what I call mindfulness, is developing a sense of open-mindedness and attentiveness to be in tune with others and to be flexible, non-judgmental. Finally, the behavioral component involves acquiring skills such as intercultural communication skills, language skills, and culturally appropriate behaviors that will allow you to interact in culturally sensitive ways. These concepts are not difficult to understand, but they can be difficult to implement because our own culture is not only so ingrained in us, it's often a part of our identity, our sense of who we are. Another challenge is that cultural intelligence and intercultural competence is largely gained by going out and doing things, interacting. But by necessity, if you don't know what to do, you're gonna make mistakes. Mistakes aren't a bad thing, it's how we learn. But a lot of us feel uncomfortable about it. So along the way, I'm going to challenge you to move outside of your comfort zone, to try new things, and to spend time reflecting on the mistakes and growing from them. It's important to take advantage of opportunities to be out in your culture, to gain knowledge, to open your heart and your mind to new ways of thinking and acting, and to practice those new ways. Another important part to gaining cultural intelligence and intercultural competence is taking time to process and reflect on the experiences. So I'll also push you to spend time dissecting and reflecting on what you're seeing and doing to turn that into deeper knowledge and understanding. I'm excited that you're taking advantage of the opportunity not just to go abroad, but to go deeper and to focus on cultural learning. I hope these videos will give you more insight and information about the cultural learning process and help you develop your intercultural competence and cultural intelligence.